Welcome to CK12's Jumpstart program. I'm Katie, a member of the CK12 team, and I'll be your instructor for today's webinar on special formatting and multimedia. A few reminders about today's webinar. While we don't anticipate any issues with our broadcast, we appreciate your understanding and patience if there are any little bumps along the way. If you have any issues with sound or video, please let us know in the chat window. Like last week, we're encouraging you to use the chat window as a place for community discussion. If you want to introduce yourself, discuss grade levels, or what FlexBooks you are customizing, sending a chat message to everyone is a great way to do that. If you want to talk to a member of the CK12 team and get a specific question answered live, you'll want to use a second window, the Q&A window, to post your questions. I'll be answering questions along with my teammate Felix throughout today's live event. Jumpstart is a 6-week program, and we're already on week 3. Thanks so much to all who have been joining us live for the conversations on Tuesday, or who have watched the recordings of our broadcasts on YouTube. Week 1 and week 2 of CK12's Jumpstart program, we're focused on finding a FlexBook and doing some basic organization and customization. This week, we're adding some special formatting and multimedia to the FlexBooks. The topics for the following 3 weeks are how to share content, assessing your students and tracking student progress, and best practices for ensuring a successful year. This week's webinar is on special formatting and multimedia. We'll be covering these areas: editor formatting, including images, embedding video and practice, and using the math editor as well as special characters. Once again, this week we are breaking down the instruction into small lessons and pausing in between topics to answer questions and do any further demonstrations before moving on to the next skill. Before we end the webinar, we'll encourage you to answer a short questionnaire to give us feedback on how we can improve the Jumpstart program experience. And as always, even after today's presentation, we'll stay on until all questions are answered. Thanks so much to everyone who is following the CK12 Foundation on Facebook and Twitter. We encourage you to continue to use the hashtag #TeachYourWay as you share your journey of using CK12. Also, thank you for continuing to participate in the Jumpstart discussion on the CK12 Cafe. We've had some fantastic questions and amazing answers being posted there. At this point, I'm going to switch over to do our first demo on editor formatting. In our last session, we talked about the basics, from adding and reordering content to simple editing. For this one, we'll go through our editor toolbar in more depth so that you will be able to create and update content to help students focus on key ideas. A reminder that you're always welcome to just simply use the basic formatting within our editor, but these are advanced options as well, in case you want to include those in your reads. Let's say you are working on a read on Mendel's pea plants. Since you've already begun customizing that read, you can find it in your library. From there, select the read, and then once you're in the read, you can hit Edit Draft. This will take you to our editor. Now that we're in the editor, let's look at our editor toolbar. It starts with your simple options for bold, italics, underlined, strike through, along with sub and superscripts. You can choose to highlight your text and change your text color, or actually highlight the whole text with a certain color. Those are pretty standard and are your basics if you just wanted to do simple editing. Everything else that we're going to talk about in terms of special editing options are really that. They're just options. So don't worry about kind of all of the nitty-gritty little pieces if they're nothing that you need to worry about within your text. They're just simply a chance for you to explore and enhance your reads that much more. The next choice on your toolbar is your formats option. From here, you can see section 1, 2, and 3. Those are your section headers. So in order to explore a little bit on how that works, we're going to actually open this read as well to see the live version of it, and we can talk about what those section headers do. So if I switch over to the live version, you can see this header, Mendel's experiments, has this faint gray line. That faint line denotes a new section within your read. It's really just to help users and students kind of understand where your breaks are in your read. So anytime you see that faint line there, you've either added it in or your next heading is a section 1 header. Within Mendel's experiments, if we scroll down, you can see Mendel's first experiment here. There's no faint line above it, so it's a subset of the bigger section on experiments. If I keep scrolling down, you'll see 2 more new sections. The summary section with that little section break, as well as the explore more section with a section break above it. So let's go back into our editor and see how that demonstrates itself in terms of the choices you made. So if I highlight Mendel's experiments and check formatting, you can see that that is a section 1 header. If I scroll down, you'll see that Mendel's first experiment is a section 2 header because it's a subtopic within the larger topic. If for some reason you wanted to use a third subset within there, you could choose a section 3 header. But once again, these are just choices for your header options. If I continue down, you'll see that the summary section is also section 1, as is explore more. And that once again gives you that delineation in between sections within your read. If we look at our basic text, you'll see that your standard text is in paragraph format. This displays the text in Proxima Nova standard font, which you can then choose to bold, italics, underline, kind of any of your basic formatting options. But that's how it will display on any of your reads in CK12. If you selected that and changed it from paragraph to pre-formatted, it would simply strip out the font options for there. So know that that's a way to kind of get a slightly different format in there, but it might not include the same options that you have for paragraphs. So I'm going to just put that back into my paragraph. The last 2 options, item and description, we'll talk about when we get to our definition term in a minute. So if we continue on, you can see the next options are your adding, editing a bulleted list or a numbered list. Those work exactly like they would in any editor, and you can see a good example of a bulleted list right in this summary. If I continue on to the insert definition list, let's use this as an example in our summary. I might want to put some of the vocabulary within this text into my summary to help my students out. So I could kind of get out of the bulleted option, go left, and then I can insert a term and definition. So the first term that came up in this read was on inherit. So I could type it inherit, and then I could type in the definition: to receive something from someone else, or from someone specifically that came before you. Now, I can hit enter, and I can go back in and insert another term and definition using the same option there. Another word used was genetics, so I could type that in along with the definition there. The study of inheritance. And I could continue to add them in using the insert term and definition option. However, I could go down and I could simply choose the increase or decrease indent option to bump back and forth within this option. So now that I bumped back, I could add, let's say, offspring, also covered, and then increase the indent to type in the definition, the result of a reproductive process. These increase and decrease indent options work both for our terms and definitions as well as for your bulleted lists and numbered lists, and even just for your standard text font. So feel free to use them to kind of differentiate back and forth where you want your alignment to go. The last item on this top part is your block quotes option. Let's say you wanted to put a quote at the beginning of this read about genetics. So if we scroll up to the top of this, I could type in right above here a quote by Harold Bernstein that says, let's put it in the block quotes. It says, in science, the insights of the past are digested and incorporated into the present in the same way that the genetic material of our ancestors is incorporated into the fabric of our body. And then I can type in the author or the person who said the quote. And if I chose to save this at this time and keep it as a draft or finalize it, remember that the keeping as a draft is internally for yourself, and any finalized versions will show up if you've shared your URL or you've published your read. So if we save that and we go from here, you can then scroll up, let's say, to the top, and we're gonna move this slightly, and I can see how that showed up within my read when I chose to save it. So it's basically centered in that quotation marks. Now, just a reminder, I know that kind of most of you have used bold, italics, and basic formatting, but if you have any questions at all, please feel free to use the Q&A section to ask those questions of us, and we'll be sure to go from there and kind of have Felix or myself answer them as we continue on. So that's the end of the first line of formatting. And we can pause for a couple minutes to answer some of the questions that have come up, and then we'll go back in and do the second line of text formatting within our editor. So at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to have Felix come on and share.
Okay. Hello, welcome to Jumpstart. So I'm going to answer any question you guys have. Just shared my screen. So I'm also in that same account, so you'll see some of the same items. So first question we have is, would you need to footnote quotes that you've added? That's a good question. So I would say the answer, yes. The system won't automatically add any footnotes, but if you'd like to capture that, you certainly can. And where you place those, you kind of have the flexibility. So you could put it at the end of a review or just towards the bottom of your reading. But I would say, yeah, you can footnote the quotes if you'd like. And then we have another question. So this is a good question also. The question is, are there any important formatting info when we cut and paste into the editor from Word? So I will say that anytime you're cutting and pasting from outside of our editor, like from Word or Google Docs, we always recommend pasting it into a plain text editor. So if you're using PC, I think Notepad would be the go-to as far as a plain text editor. And then on a Mac, you'd be looking at something like TextEdit. And what we usually recommend is you copy that content from the document and then straight into the text editor. And what this actually does is it takes out a lot of the formatting. So you might see some of the text change to just not have the bold or the indentations. And that's really the safest way to get it into our system because our editor can't support a lot of the formatting options that are available in Word and Google Docs. So this is just kind of like a precaution just to make sure it doesn't come in with any of those, I guess, foreign formatting options. And then once you're inside of the editor, you can use the options that Katie went over briefly, and we have a few more coming up, just to kind of reformat that and make it look a lot nicer and closer to what you were using, or the format you previously had. So we do have another question. How do you center a block of text that is not in quotes? So let me open up this. And I'll just go over these options again. So we don't have a, I guess like a center option. The closest thing I guess you could do would be the indentation. So you can play with that until you kind of get it to a position where it looks somewhat decent or closer to maybe what you would want. And so this option up here, kind of next to the block quote, you can hit that and move it over. And then if you need to do more, you can do more spaces. But we don't have a center, I guess, a center option for the text. So you kind of have to manually play with it. So that would be for centering the text. Yeah, just kind of use the indentation, and then if you need a little bit more, you can use a few spaces using the space bar and just kind of shift it over. And I would play around with that. Maybe keep his draft just to see how it's showing up, and then you can make adjustments as needed. And so we have another question here. So if you finalize a draft, is there any way to go back in and edit? And the answer is yes. I actually just did that with this, but I can do it again. So basically, you'd click on the finalize option. It's going to go through the saving dialog. And then once that's done, it's going to jump you back out. Actually, here we go. So now you're here. This is kind of where you come to once it's saved. So you can kind of see your edits. Now, if we go back into the library, this guy's here, the one at the very top, the one we just modified. So it no longer has the draft. There's no, if it doesn't have draft, that means it's finalized. And also you can see that this was created by us. So last week we did talk about adding things to library. So if you see something that's created by and it doesn't have your user account, then it's likely you added it to it. So if it says created by you, then it's yours. So this was finalized, and then to get back in and start making new modifications, you just click on those three dots and then select the edit option. And you can do that for drafts and for finalized of your modalities. You can modify endlessly. So we have another question. This one is asking, can you merge two chapters into one? So we talked about, let's see, editing FlexBooks a little later. Last week. And so I guess real quickly, let me go back out of here. Go to the library. Let me pull up this guy. So I'm going to open up one of our existing FlexBooks. And so for that question, can you merge two chapters into one? If you have two chapters that have these icons with the green triangles next to them, what you would want to do is expand it and then drag those sections into the chapter that you want. So you kind of have to individually pull them out and slide them into another chapter. So like this is all of chapter 4, which is pretty big. But if you wanted to add it to another chapter, you'd have to click on this. Actually, let me expand one more. But next to these section icons, there's an edit icon, which is the pencil. There's a remove or delete, which is that X, and then this arrow here, kind of like a T arrow. You can click on that, hold it, and then you can drag it into place. So I just expanded two chapters. So here's chapter 4, chapter 3. What you'd want to do is just take this and drag it. And you can see the numbering's taken care of for you. And then even in the other chapter, the numbers kind of reassign themselves. So as far as merging two chapters into one, if it's not too big, I would suggest that. If you have a lot of content, it might be a bit much to do that. The other thing I will note is if you have kind of guys sitting out here on their own, and say you had like a couple chapters that didn't have this icon to the left, the triangle, what you could do is you can always create a new chapter. You can always create a new chapter and then drag, I'll actually just do it, and then drag those guys into it. And then we also have the video from the last webinar, which talked about this, posted on our Jumpstart page. So I would, if you did have any questions, I'd recommend taking a peek at that. And so you can create another chapter and then drag those kind of freestanding guys into there if you needed to at all. And then I guess on a related, there was another question on, can you split one chapter into two? And so the answer is it's kind of the same process. So you can either, if you have an existing chapter, or if you don't have a chapter, you can create one like we just did, and then just take those guys and drag them to where you want to position them. And that would be splitting the chapter. If they were individually, let's see. So if they weren't actually inside of a chapter, they were kind of freestanding like this, there won't really be a way to split it other than going in and editing the content. And that would look just like what we were seeing before with the editor. So you would maybe copy or just cut out some text and then create like a new read, and then you can split it that way. But if you're just referring to taking like some sections out of the chapter, then yeah, you can absolutely do that. Just drag and drop into an existing chapter or create a new chapter and start working from there. And so I'm going to go ahead and answer another question. So the question is, while adding text from a doc as plain text, hang on one second, let me read this. Okay, so the question is, while adding text from a doc as paste as plain text, I think the question is, will that also help instead of first putting it into a plain text editor? I would just maybe go with pasting into the plain text editor. The paste as plain text may work, but we've had more success of just pasting it into the plain text editor. But if you're finding that it is working, then I would if it's just text, that might be a safe option. But I would just test it out first and see if it how it turns out. But we usually recommend just using a plain text editor just to be on the safe side.
Great, thanks, Felix. I think we're going to stop there and do a little more with the formatting, and then we will continue on and continue to stop and break and answer questions as we go from there. So let me go back to sharing my screen. And so we're still in that same, example of a read that we were working with. This one's great for a lot of the different editors. So we're going to go from here and move on to the next line of toolbar editor options. So your first options are your insert edit links as well as removing links. So I could take this section right here, and I could choose to remove the link from this section if I didn't actually want that to be a link. Maybe instead I wanted to have that section be just showing up where the P experiment is. So I'm going to copy that text, and we're going to go from there. I can finalize this for a second. Oh, Felix was working in this. So this is that example of kind of that collaborative editing piece where you want to make sure you're not in the same read at the same time. So if I go back to my library for a second, Felix had finalized this read. So I can click on my library option, and I can open that read again. And then I can click edit. And that way the system alerted me that he had been making changes and that I probably didn't want to be doing any of that editing at the same time. So if I scroll down to the bottom of here, back into the summary and explore more section, now that I'm the last person that's in there and it's not having issues saving, I can go in and I can take this same text, I can cut it or copy it, and I can move it into this peer experiment just using your simple insert link. Now, if I've already selected my text, you'll see the text to display shows up here, and I can paste in the URL either by right-clicking and choosing paste or using all your standard Control or Command-C, Command-V options to paste. We're going to talk about anchors and targets in a second. So all I would need to do at this point is insert it, and now you can see that if I click on that, that link would show up, and my students could click on that link. Similarly, I could say at this, and maybe I hadn't written my text in yet. I could insert a new link, paste in the link I wanted to show up, and then type the text that I wanted to show up in there. So insert. And that would give you the option to kind of write your own text beforehand or paste a link in and then decide what text you wanted. So they're pretty standard from there. The one little difference is our anchoring option. So that might not be as clear, and I want to spend a second going into that. So in my summary, let's say I had a student that was like, oh wait, who's Gregor Mendel? I could choose to link within this text, and I could create an anchor, and I could choose figure 1 for that anchor. So if I did that, I would insert that figure, and this will link to that top image at the very beginning. So if I went to open this again, and let me go here, if I scroll down to the Gregor Mendel one that I had already saved, so let's see if we can have it in here. I would then be able to click on that link, and it would bump me right back up to the first figure in this read, which is the picture of Gregor Mendel, and that would help students kind of navigate back and forth. So that anchor option that you're working with is definitely helpful if you want to kind of reference a figure or a table or an image or something that's in your read. And then the last thing that was in there was just your target, and you could choose to add a new window to there if you wanted it to open in a different window. And if you wanted a title or some hover over text, you could include that information at that point. So that's your basic link and unlink options. Your next choice in here that we get to is your page break. Now, the thing about page breaks is if you were printing your book, this would be extremely useful if you wanted answers or something special to start on a brand new page. It's not going to really affect the online version because there's no clean page breaks when you're reading a single web page. So know that if you're building in answers and you want those on a separate page, that would be useful, but for your online version, something that you don't even have to think about. The next option in here is your table option. So let's use the same read. And there was this great table up here on seeds and flowers and pods and stems. But if you needed a text version of that, I could actually go in here and insert a table. And so if I counted kind of over and down, I could say, let's insert something that is maybe 6 or 7 by 3. I'm going to add in my seed form, the next seed option, flower color, and so on across the top of my table, just like I normally would. And then I could put my characteristics down here, round, wrinkled, etc. Now, if I right-click on this option, and you want to make sure you're kind of in there, sometimes if you're clicking outside, you'll get other options for basic text, so just make sure you're within the table properties. You can delete the whole table. You can insert rows or add rows, kind of cut rows, same deal with columns. And here's a case where you actually could use that left, center, or right, or justify alignment within a cell in a table. So you could always create a table and kind of align everything in the center and then just not put a border around it, and that would help you kind of center a 1-by-1 cell. The last piece of here is your table properties. So if I go into the table properties, I could put a border around something, I could make it inline if I wanted the table to be inside text. Don't really worry about the summary part, but the caption is actually important if you want a header on your table. So if I click confirm on that, I could then go from here and I could type in characteristics of pea plants. And you'll see that that's actually your header. So really, if you want kind of that one overarching bar across the top, that would be the piece. And then you can see that because I chose to put borders around this table, it will actually add those borders to all of the cells. And if I continue to type, you'll see kind of the cells expand based on the text within them. So as I filled in the text, it would even out a little bit more as I worked through that table. We're going to skip these next few options because they have to do with the math editor and special characters, images, and multimedia, which we're all going to get to. So you'll get to see those shortly. But the option after this is actually fantastic. When I first discovered this, I was so excited, and it's insert an element box. So I'm going to put an element box down, actually up at the top when we first started talking about genetics. So here, genetics is the study of inheritance. If I really wanted that to be a key idea, I could choose to add an element box. And I could say genetics, and then I could type in the definition, the study of inheritance. Now, this will highlight that key feature. It's another way to do your vocab and definitions. I taught math for a number of years, so as a math teacher, if you remember in like every math textbook you've ever seen, those shaded blue boxes with all your formulas, or for science formulas, this is a great way to kind of highlight those key ideas and those formulas that will help students, especially if they're struggling to read larger text, and kind of focus on the pieces of information that they need the most. So that's the use of our element box there. The next feature here is your horizontal line. So let's say I didn't want a brand new section, or I wanted even a break kind of before a new subsection. I could choose to insert a horizontal line, and you'd get the same faded kind of like light distinction between sections within this section by adding that in yourself. I could choose to undo that if I decided I didn't want it, or redo it if I did. But once again, your standard shortcut, Command or Control Z, will work to undo text within our editor as well. The final option on here is your full screen option. So if I go to full screen, you'll see that I can work in the editor and have a little bit more space and layout, and that your editor options still remain at the top. And then I could go back to there, or I could just go kind of back into the editor itself, or kind of escape out of that full screen option, or even toggle using full screen, which I can show you just by expanding to full screen and then going back down into the editor. So kind of all your options for those pieces. At this point in time, we have wrapped up the major pieces that we're not going to focus a little bit more on in our editor. So I'm going to switch back to Felix and let him answer a couple more of the questions that have come in at this point in time, and then we'll move on into kind of inserting images and attributing them correctly.
All right, start my video here. Okay, so we did have a, a question come in about the anchors, and the question was, is the anchor a kind of internal hyperlink? So the answer is yes. That kind of helps users navigate within your content and kind of jump around without maybe having to scroll. So an example of that in this read, I just saw one. Okay, so like this figure below is an example. So like if I click on this, it's going to just kind of jump this into view. And then similarly, just below that, this one here kind of scrolls that image into view. So you can absolutely use the anchors as like an internal hyperlinking. If it makes it easier to kind of bounce around between certain references, that is an option for you. And then we did have another question about adding videos, which we're going to cover later, but I will go ahead and read the question out. So the question was, if you were to add a video, if you wanted to add a video about Mendel, would you do it as a link that could open in a new window? So that actually is one way to do it. There's another option that we're going to cover coming up, which is embedding a video. But you could actually do a link. I can show you real quick how that would look. So this is actually a YouTube video. So you'd copy and paste in your URL, and then here would be like the text that you wanted. So I'm using really generic text. So this is what's actually going to show to the user, and then the title could be some title. Anchors, if there's anything you want to do the internal, I guess, hyperlinking with, you could select. And then the target here is by default it's none, but if you wanted that new window to open up, then you can select that and then insert. So if you did have, and not just for videos, but for any kind of links, you have those options. So if you wanted to open up in a new window and not have them sort of leave your reading, you can have that option is available for you. And we have another question. If a student clicks on an anchor, can he go back to the text he was reading? And yeah, so let's see, that's a good question. Let me switch over. All right. So if you were to click on this guy and you hit back. So what I just did there was I clicked on the link itself, and then up here I'm hitting the back button for the browser itself, and it's jumping me back to those places. So if you're using the anchors, you do have that option of just like kind of jumping back, and this is pretty similar on other websites also. So if you weren't aware of that, that's another, I guess, helpful tip. That was a really good question. Makes it easier for students to kind of go navigate in between and not having to scroll like all the way up if it was a really long section. So they do have that option, and you can just hit the back button from the browser, and it'll take you back to the section that you were previously at. And then, so again, on that video question, we are going to cover that coming up next. But if you did want to use a link, maybe you didn't want to have the video embedded, you could do that, and hopefully that example kind of gave you an idea, even just for other links you wanted to include.
Great, thanks, Felix. That seems to have answered most of the questions that have come up so far, and we're going to move on into including images, and then eventually get to that embedding video and practice piece. So let me share my screen again. And let's say we wanted to change the picture at the top of this page. I could open this up once again from my library, because I've already been saving this, or if I'm on the page, just click edit if I've saved. And I can choose to change this image. Let's say I wanted a picture here. I could delete the original picture. I'm just going to give myself some space so I don't end up in block quotes. And I'm going to insert a new image there. So you could choose an image from a URL if you had a URL that included the like JPEG extension, or you could choose a file from here. So I found another image that I really liked, and I said, let's open this and include this image. You can preview it down here and see what it looks like. And then now we can get to the image options part. So this is kind of where your choices come in. Your first option is to choose a figure versus an inline image. And the biggest distinction for this is if you were actually going to print your book. So in order to make books kind of paginate correctly and not have large chunks of space where the picture would end up being on, like on the next page and then the text continues, but then you have a really open space on one page, that's a great option for a figure. And so by doing that, you have to know that your figure could be bumped to another page and text could go up ahead of it. So especially if you're like writing, a math equation and then putting an image of a graph underneath that, you want to make sure that if it needs to come directly after certain text or in a very specific place, that you choose your inline option. For now, it's at the top, so it doesn't really matter as much. So I'm going to pick figure. I can then choose a size, either postcard, thumbnail, or full page, and a position, normal or left aligned. At this point in time, I could put a caption in, let's say generations, and even a title. And this is actually a hover over thing. So you'll see hover generations when we say this and kind of go through that piece. From here, I can't change the width, and we can talk about kind of your ID and source and credit in a minute. But let's do this, and let's insert this image. And it's just saving it and kind of uploading that whole file. And now you can see the image that I chose to replace this with. the caption that I put underneath there. And then if I just put my cursor above that, you'll see that little hover over a title. So if you wanted to add some information when a kid was hovering over that on maybe what it was and not have it be in the text, that's a place you can do that. Now, let's say I put an image in and I said, oh, I don't really want that whole caption. I don't want it centered like that. I really want this to be inline. If I click on the image first, I can then choose to insert or edit that image, or I can right-click and insert, edit, or delete that image. If I click outside, you'll notice that I get the option to kind of put a new image in. So in order to edit something that you've already put in there, make sure you first click on the image itself, and then we can edit this. So we're going to go back to the image options, and I'm going to change this to be an inline image. Now you'll notice this changes and grays out certain other options. I can't change the size or the position or the caption because it's an inline image. So those aren't the same things that I'm working with. I can choose to put the width. So let's say I want this to be 480 pixels wide. I can put that piece in there. And I could change the hover over title if I wanted to. You'll notice that the ID was auto-generated by CK12, so that's not a field that you really have to worry about at all. The last piece that I want to make sure you put in here is your source and your credit, especially because we're licensed under Creative Commons, and if you republish or you share this and someone chooses to customize it, even if you remember who that source is or if you made the image yourself, you definitely want to put in who did that work. So this image that I picked from Flickr. I made sure that it had all the rights reserved or all the license compliance that I needed. And then I went into Flickr and I downloaded it and I went from there. But I can simply choose share in Flickr and pull the short URL code for there. I can copy it. And then I can take that and I can paste it in my source. And that will tell me anyone that's trying to access it, like where to go to find that image. If they wanted to download an original copy and get a clean version, it's licensed accordingly. But if you notice, that license was an attributions license. So I need to make sure that I pull the author or the photographer's name off of here in order to accurately cite that. So I'm going to type in the author and add that to the image content. And those credits will show up at the bottom of your read. So make sure anytime you're inserting an image, you've filled in the credit for sure, even if you made it yourself, and a source if you have a URL or full text for a book that it came from or something like that. When I insert that, you'll notice that it's now in line, so I could type stuff kind of on either side or what I needed to do. And they are, the bottom part, that original caption that said generations, just got converted to text. I could choose to keep that and continue to add information, or I could go back from there. Just remember that all images that you want to be used are CC BY images, so that you have full rights to use them and with only the attribution piece. So that's Creative Commons BY. And also, or if they are just open public domain images, that's kind of your best bet, or creating your own images yourself. But so if you have any questions on that in terms of that licensing, you can check our help page again, which you can always find up here, or you can check our terms of use and kind of go from there. But make sure that you have that attribution in there in order to be license compliant, both for what images you're taking and as you move forward. So that wraps up images and attribution from this point in time. It sounds like we currently don't have any questions, so maybe we'll move on to embedding videos in practice. And I know the practice component especially might have some great questions. But feel free to keep using that Q&A or ask us questions in chat, but if you really want them answered live, the Q&A option is the one that we'll track and we'll continue to be answering as we go through. So I think we're done with this one for a little bit. So we can keep this as a draft, or I could finalize it. We're just going to kind of move on. And we're going to move into math to talk about the next two options. So let's say I wanted to teach a unit on trigonometry. I could go to that trigonometry page. This one I kind of started, but I could go to that trig page either via the Pre-Calculus Concepts book, or by searching right triangle trig and pulling up that concept page in this read. So a lot of different options to get to here. And then I can click customize. And once I click customize, it will take me back into my editor. And so our standard formatting options, as you've seen kind of at the top, we've gone through. But we want to start by talking about embedding some video. And let's just kind of keep both of these options open so you can see what's happening in the read itself as well as in the editor. So if I scroll down within the original read, you'll see that there's a video embedded. It's called Introduction to Trig Functions Using Triangles, and that's already in the read. So if you didn't have a new video that you wanted to use, you're welcome to just continue to use the videos that we've embedded, and you would be good to go. But let's say you made your own video and you wanted to include your own video instead. In the editor, you can find that section where that video was by looking for this little multimedia box that includes kind of the headphones and the play button and the rest of your multimedia options. So once I do that, if I just deleted that, it would just eliminate the video that's in there. So now that's gone, and I can choose to add my own video. And when I insert video or any multimedia, you'll get the option to include an embed code. So the simplest way for you to do this, if you have your own video, is to have it on YouTube, because then you can easily pull the embed code from there. So this is a sine cosine tangent lesson that CK12 has made, and I've decided I want to include that one in there instead of the original one. So on that page within YouTube, I would simply click share. And by opening share, you're probably going to see just the basic link to there, which you can share on Facebook and Twitter, etc. But right next to it, you'll see this embed option. And you can simply highlight this content, copy it, and paste it directly using shortcut keys or by right-clicking and clicking paste into the embed code box. Now, that's all you would need to do if you don't know anything about embed codes. If you know about HTML coding and you wanted to change your width or your height, by all means, go ahead and do so. But at this point in time, you could say, great, I have this piece here. I'm going to preview it. Oh, good, I did use the right link. That tells me it's good to go. And then I can insert that video right in here. And if I did that and then I saved it, you'd be able to see that video show up within your read like this. Now, we've talked about embedding practice as well. And so it's really the same process. So let's go here and actually back into the editor where I was. And let's say that if I scroll down, I have the review section with my questions in here. But review is great, especially if I'm printing something out and I can write all over it. But if I want my students to do any adaptive practice related to this, and I don't want them to have to find that practice kind of based on what they're working with, I can choose to embed practice in here using the same embed multimedia. So the biggest question in order to do that is really where that practice comes from. So if we look at our right triangle trig read, the original one, you'll see anything that's linked to one of our concepts will have on if you're using a computer, will have that option to go to the matching practice. You can find it under the practice tab, which would allow you to kind of jumpstart right there or at the top. And if I click on that and I go to the practice modality page, not actually into the practice, I don't want to start doing the practice itself, but this practice modality page, I can click on these little 3 expanding dots and you'll see the option to embed. So if I click on that embed option, it will pull up all of my text for embed. I'm going to copy that, and then I'm going to go back into my read, and I'm going to choose the Insert Edit Media, and I'm going to paste my embed code in there. And then you'll see it's loading the practice details, and that's what it's going to look like in your read. So I can insert that. You'll get within the editor, oh, there's some sort of multimedia there, kind of notation, so you know what's above and below that. And once again, if I saved or finalized that, I could then go over, scroll down, and actually see this practice within here. And then your students don't have to think about where they need to go to do the matching practice that goes with that part. So that's kind of the two, including videos and including embedded practice that go with that. And then we also talked about images. But it sounds like we're getting some questions in, so I'll take a short break. We'll let Felix do some questions, and then I'll come back to talk about math editor formatting. So we'll save kind of that piece for the last major topic of today.
All right. share my screen. Okay, so let me go through some of these questions for you guys. So one question that came in was, how do I preview what the FlexBook will look like when printed? So actually, let me jump over to the library and find a FlexBook that we have. All right. So if you notice on the left here, there's a few options. There's one that says download PDF. So this would be the option that you would want as far as previewing it in that sort of printed format. You can click on this if the file's already there, meaning someone's clicked that link before. Then the PDF will download like right away. Otherwise, you'll see that same prompt that I just saw, and then once it's finished generating, you'll receive an email with a link to download it. And we also have an app, a FlexBook Reader app, which will allow you to, instead of having like this PDF download for the only like one of the only offline options, what the FlexBook Reader will allow you to do is from the app itself, you can download like a CK12 book, and then it'll be available to you for offline use within the app. So it's not like a separate file you have to manage. Everything's managed within the app itself. And I think rolling out, we're going to have support just the CK12 books, and then explore on getting like the user generated, so your own books from your own library as an option to download. So that's another feature that's coming. But so to answer that question, to sort of preview it, download the PDF would be your preview, and then you can kind of see what you want to change or not change, and then go from there. So that was previewing a FlexBook to see what it looks like printed. We had another question come in on creating. So the question was, where or how can I create graphs of equation to use as images? So we don't have our editor doesn't have a sort of a graph. I guess our editor will not create the graphs. But if you have another piece of software or tool that you're using that can export the graph as an image, which I think is an option on Word and Google Docs. I'm not sure. You can double check that. But if you can export those graphs as an image, then you can insert it as an image, just like we kind of walked through in the demo. So as far as creating graphs, you would have to use, I guess, another tool to do that. But you can definitely insert those images. You can definitely insert it as an image, kind of near your equation or wherever you'd like. So we do allow you to insert the image itself. Another question came in on, I guess, more on the attribution. So the question is, if I personally know the photographer and then they've given me permission to use their images, do I only put his name for credit on a photo? So I would say, just as a, I guess, rule of thumb, just put as much of the information that you have on that. Let's see if I can bounce over to, so that way you can see like credit and source. I don't see it here. So I would say if name is the only thing you have, if not, try to put as much information as you can, and that's good. I'll also mention our license is down here, so it's CC by NC, and I'll just click on that link. So kind of here's the guidelines that you'd be working with also under when using our editor. So as long as he's okay with like these terms, then yeah, adding his name and trying to get as much information for that credit as possible. All right, so a few other questions. Can I embed a video I made in EduCreations? So as long as there's a embed code similar to like what we saw from YouTube, I would say that you could embed it. I'm not too familiar with the EduCreations, their website, but if they do expose like an embed feature, then the process of embedding is exactly the same for like what we just saw for the YouTube video. It's just copying that embed code and then pasting it into into the editor. And I actually wanted to point out one thing. So if you're ever working on something and you're ready to insert a video and you don't see it highlighted, like this one's kind of grayed out, one thing to check is, what I'm going to do is actually look in the formats. So you see how this has the section 2 highlighted? That's one of the reasons why this is not showing the video, just because we don't allow videos to be within like a section container, so to speak. So I'm going to remove that and actually also take off this bold. There you go. So I'm going to change it to like paragraph. And now you can see, I'll just remove that bold. But now you can see the option is there. So even if you were to, let me just backtrack. So I just undid those changes. I just jumped to a new line, and as you can see, it's still there. So I'll check the formatting again. It's paragraph, but this time there's a bold highlighted. So just go ahead and clear that formatting, and then the option is there. So if you're ever going through your document and you notice like the option's not there, just kind of peek around to see if there's any of these formatting options checked off. So like bold or italics, and then also under here, just go ahead and check, make sure it's under paragraph, and that should bring that option back to you. But I have seen that happen for people before, so I just wanted to point that out. And let's see. So another question was, is it possible to embed a video if it's on Google Drive? So if it's a file that's on there, there won't be a way to embed the file. We would actually need the embed code itself. So if there's a way for maybe to upload it to YouTube and just for that embed code, you can do that. But as far as files go, there isn't a way to I guess embed a file like you would with the embed code. So as long as you can get it converted and have that embed code exposed, then you can definitely do that. But if it's just a file on Google Drive and you don't want it to be embedded, you can possibly do it as an attachment in this resources section here. But for embedding videos within the document itself, you would want that embed code.
Great, Felix. I'm going to stop you there. We have a couple of questions that have to do with practice modalities and embedding them and how they work. And I'm happy to answer some of those as we continue on. But know that when we talk about student assessment, we'll go through all the nitty-gritty pieces about practice. So I want to make sure we get through kind of the topics for today, and then we'll stay on and answer those for the people that have asked. But let's kind of do that last round about math characters at this time. So I'm going to share my screen again and take over from Felix. And I know one question that came up when he said was the attribution. So just to let you know, I think he hadn't refreshed after I added this attribution. So it'll show up in this image attribution piece at the bottom. So if you've added an attribution and you're not seeing that for some reason, definitely let us know. And you'll notice that we included the credit for the photographer, the source that it came from, and what it's licensed under at this point in time. But if someone wanted kind of the original just CC BY license, they could always go back to the source and pull that image. So let's go back into right triangle trig, and we can, now that we're in math, which is a great place, we can talk about our math editor and our special characters. So the first thing is, anywhere in regular text, you could use our little special character option, and you could kind of use a number of different options that you would expect in special characters: less than, greater than, right here and there, or equal to. There's a little degree symbol here, or pi, as you go through kind of in various formats. So if you just need a short special character, or even kind of like some of the simple quarter, half, and three-quarter fractions, feel free to just include those and don't worry about our math editor as a whole. But if you need anything else kind of funky in terms of formatting, that's really where the math editor will come in. So I'm going to close the special character option, and we're going to talk about kind of editing an existing equation. So anywhere that you see a math equation already in our text, you can actually just double click on it and it will pop open our math editor. At this point in time, once it loads the equation, you'll see kind of the code that goes with it, and then the option and the preview screen at the bottom. Now, we're going to talk about if you know code and if you don't know code, so don't freak out if you're not sure about coding for math equations. The biggest thing that you might want to change without changing the text of an equation itself is where it's showing up in your content. So this would be a case where align at, inline, or block math are your three options for showing up in text. And inline would show up wherever you input that equation. So especially if you want something like an x variable and then you want to keep talking about what happens to that x variable, that's a great choice for just getting that x in kind of its special math formatting. Align at doesn't change the preview, but it would put that on a separate line of text on the left. So it's a way to kind of break up your text with an equation on the left-hand side. And then block math will do the same thing, except it will center it. So this is another way to get kind of centered text. A lot of the reason why you would want centered text is to highlight some key idea or equation. And so you can always put it in the math editor and kind of get your equation in that place. If, let's say I had accidentally typed in like sine was adjacent over hypotenuse and it looked like that, you could potentially, and if I could spell adjacent, you could potentially kind of adjust that piece just by taking a glance at the code. But that's something that you don't necessarily need to worry about at all. So we're going to put that back to the correct version, and then I can add that question in. So you notice it's now centered compared to the other images or the other creations of the text within here. However, if you know zero coding and you're not really sure what to do or how to kind of create your own equations, you can always put in a separate equation. So let's say if down in the review section, you wanted to add in some extra problems. So I could go right in here and I could click on the math editor. And the math editor on our toolbar is that little X in curly brackets. So I open up that math editor and you'll see an extra component if it's not already code that's in the system. And that extra component is this little option to start at the top. So if I click in here and I want to say the cosine of 3 pi over 2. This is a drop-down menu option. So my cosine you can find under here, under kind of your trig options, and I can put that in there. And then I could say, okay, I want 3 pi over 2, but I want it to show up as a fraction. So my fractions would be here. I could then take that and insert a fraction. And I could type in 3, and now I want my pi symbol. So I could go over to my Greek symbol options and choose pi, and then click in here and do 2. And I can preview this, and you'll see I have cosine of 3 pi over 2. Now, all of the rest of these, as you work your way through, you'll see your different options for radicals. Just you can see kind of the hover over option, and then if you click on it, it will open up kind of the subsets within that menu option. So definitely explore them, your integrals, your functions, logs, limits, and kind of your basic just add, subtract, multiply, divide. Although you could always type in here, and you could, if you click inside, you could say, okay, well, what if I had like 3 pi plus, and you could add that piece in there if it's just a simple keyboard key. But if I just want 3 pi over 2, I can go from there. I could choose my alignment, and I could click add. One note for you guys. If I start messing with the code because I know how to work with math code, automatically the option for a dropdown disappears. So if you don't know coding, then just kind of stay up in the editor until you're all done and kind of just use your dropdown option, because that will translate to code, but it doesn't work in both directions. So if you know how to type in various math coding, by all means do so. I'm going to put that bracket back so it doesn't mess with the code, and then I can add it in. But just make sure that you're not jumping back and forth, because you'll lose that option at the top. So that's it for kind of adding new equations in. You could add them inline in a number of different series, or I could add them, in this case, we can always double check that and say, oh, that one was, let's see, an inline option. If I wanted it to be a line at, it would still show up on the left. If I wanted it to be block math, it would show up in the center. So a great way to kind of get all of that extra special formatting. And something you should note, you can use the same math editor if you were going to create your own questions in our practice tool. And we'll talk more about kind of creating practice tool pieces. But that way you could create ones where you insert an integral, and then for every kind of place that you had there, you could highlight some of those features and make them fill in the blank boxes. And so you could kind of create the format and then have students fill that in. Because they won't have the key codes on their computer to necessarily create that integral as you work through. The last thing I want to just kind of pull out, if you're stuck on this at all and you have any questions, there's this lovely bright orange box at the top that says how to use the math editor. If I click on that, it will open up a tab that includes the help desk version of the math editor. So kind of on any page that you're on, if you're here, you can always find it at the top, or within the math editor tool, you can kind of jump out without losing all the work you're doing on the math editor. So that wraps up kind of the last course section. I'm going to have Felix answer some questions, and then we'll wrap up the webinar after that.
All right, thanks, Katie. And I'm going to share my screen again. All right, so let's jump to some questions. All right, so I think these two may have been answered, but I'll just read them off and say the answer. So the question was, can you embed Plix the same way we've embedded the practice into a read? And so you cannot embed Plix in the practice sort of in the same way. We are working on making it an assignable modality. So once you get into creating groups and having your assignments, Plix will also become an option for you to assign. But in the meantime, if you wanted to include a link to Plix, you can. And then that's just, again, taking that link and then adding it to your resource, kind of like what we did over here with the new video link. So it would be the same process. Just take the link from the address bar, copy it, and insert it, and that'll give you a link that they could click on and get to the Plix. And then the other question I think was also answered, but I'll just go ahead and read it out loud, is can you read a book offline with the CK12 Reader app? And the answer is yes. And then again, we're also going to be adding support down the line for like your own FlexBooks. So when that comes, then you'll be able to have your own FlexBooks offline within the reader itself, and it'll still render and look just as nice as it did online. So the answer, can you read the book offline with the CK12 Reader app? And the answer is yes. That's actually one of the biggest reasons we created, was to kind of address that offline need, and so that was one of our answers to that. So the answer is yes, you can read it offline. Another question that came up was, can the math editor be used in a science flexbook? And so the answer to that is also yes. We expose the same editor. It doesn't really take into context if you've added like if it's for a math concept or a science concept. You'll have all the same options, so you'll definitely be able to use the math editor with the science resource. A question came in on the embedded practice. So the question is, if students begin practice that I have embedded, can they start over or begin once done and see the answers? So with the embedded, so yes, if they've actually gone through the practice and they have exhausted all the questions, there will be an option for them to restart. But even if they don't reach that, if they want to just continue to practice, they have that option. So they can continue to go through the practice as many times as they want. They'll always have that option. And then as soon as they submit or they're done, it'll give them kind of like a progress and see like which questions they missed, what was the right answer. And so, yeah, they do have that option, and they'll be able to do it over and over as much as they want. And then here is another question on practice. So this question, is there a way to create practice modalities that I can customize for my students and for my own content? Well, that's a good question. So yes, there is a way for you to do that. I just clicked over to the library. So over here in this create new, we have quiz, which is essentially where you would want to create your own sort of practice and quiz. And we're actually going to cover that in the coming week. We're going to go over like creating these quizzes and embedding them. Once you have this created, though, the embed process is the same as we saw with the practice. There's a link to grab the embed code and insert it. But you can definitely create your own quiz. create your own questions, and then the way it's really customized for your content and your students, and then you can embed that also. And then again, we're going to cover that coming up, so that's why I'm just kind of giving a verbal answer. And we have another question. So this one is it possible to print an inserted table within the chapter to allow students to practice further, or part of the page within the chapter? Okay. Oh, I see. So as far as our PDF option, it's really an all or nothing. We don't have a way to, I guess, print out only sections of it. I suppose if you wanted to do that, you can maybe create like a section that just has the piece that you wanted, and then you can print that out. But actually, for the practice, there is an option to print a worksheet. Let me see if I can show you guys. And I'm not sure if this is more of what you're looking for. So I am on the practice, kind of where we saw to get the embed code. So here there's two options, which is download PDF and download HTML. And what this is actually going to do is going to give you, let me move this chat window 1 second. Okay, so as you can see, it's asking for an answer key. So within our own practice, you have this option to generate these worksheets as maybe like a handout. If you want the answer key, you can select no, or if these are the other two options, yes, or just the odds. One thing I will say with this is if you plan on having like a master, just print this out once and then make copies of that, and then you can distribute the worksheet that way. Because if you were to do this, as you do this different times, you can get random questions. So the questions may not line up to what you previously printed. So if you're actually generating worksheets and you do select the answer key, or if you just want to give it to a group of students, just print this out once and then use this as your master, and then just make copies of this test so that it's the same across for all students. Otherwise, you can get random questions that won't match up. And so I think for printing the table, I would say if this is more of what you're looking for, then this is an option for you. But as far as like printing just portions of the text, with our PDF, you just kind of get whatever's on the screen. But if you wanted to move it into like a different section, you absolutely can do that, and then just print that just that content within that section.
Great, thanks, Felix. I think two just added notes to that page break option would be a great way to kind of, if you don't want to create a separate read for it, to break off that section and then choose to just print that single page, kind of bookend it with a page break on the top and the bottom, and then you could print that page. And Felix's comment about kind of all of that practice and generating different ones, we'll cover that in week 5 in excruciating detail. In terms of all the nitty-gritty options that you could choose. And really the simplest one is just to use our adaptive practice. So there's always that choice to kind of use what we have and not worry about customization. But if you want to create your own quiz, we can definitely go into all of those pieces on generating a quiz with exact questions that you want. And we'll be doing that in week 5. So at this point in time, let me jump back into here. And I want to kind of wrap up this core part by saying thanks for joining us today. And we're going to still stay on live after. So if you're like, oh, I forgot a question, feel free to keep posting in Q&A. But we want to kind of wrap up. We will have office hours this Thursday. So if you start messing with all these formatting and you run into any questions, or if you're ending up watching us later on and you have questions, feel free to swing by our office hours. One of us will be here to answer your questions at that time. And we'll post that link on the website shortly. But there is already kind of that note for where the office hours are. You can also reach us throughout the week at support@ck12.org. Or you can ask us questions on the forum, and we'll continue to kind of post answers to that and encourage discussion across you and your other colleagues that are working on this program. Don't forget to talk about Jumpstart on Twitter and Facebook using the hashtag #TeachYourWay. So feel free to continue building that community and encouraging others to join in and use these resources. Just a little preview for next week. Week 4 will be on sharing content. So we'll be talking about creating groups, sharing content with your groups within there, sharing content via our little Shareaplane, which if you've noticed the little green like paper airplane in the bottom, the options for that, sharing URLs, and then publishing books on CK12, and especially within the schools where you can kind of encourage those in your school or district to access the resources that you've been working on together. And then with this new edition of our FlexBook app, we'll talk about kind of sharing your content via that, or CK12 content at this point in time via that app. So if you have any questions, it looks like we got at least another one kind of coming in. We'll stay on and answer those. But you're welcome to check out the Google form, especially if you want participation credit for this week. It's just tinyurl.com/CK12Jumpstart3, since we are in week 3 of this program. But feel free to answer that. It will be added to the chat window, and it's already live on the week 3 website. So feel free to go check it out there and let us know how we're doing and what would be helpful as we continue on in this program. So that's it for our official programming. Thank you so much for joining us today on this day after July 4th. And we'll bring Felix back on the screen to kind of stay and answer any of those last questions as we go. Have a great day.
All right. So I'm back on. If you guys have any questions, I think we've answered the open ones, but yeah, feel free to post those in the Q&A, and we'll be here.
One other note that came up in the chat window was about educreations, and someone noted that kind of the easiest option for that was to post those educreation videos on YouTube, and then you'd be able to pull an embed code link from YouTube. So that's definitely an option kind of in terms of embedding it at that point. Okay, well, it looks like we're not getting more questions at this time. So hopefully that means we've answered all of your questions about formatting, or you're going to be joining us in future weeks for some of the details on that sharing and assessment and kind of just last wrap up for the future year. So we're going to wrap up this meeting at this point in time, and we thank you all for joining us. We look forward to seeing you on Thursday during our office hours, or again next week on Tuesday.